I'm going to talk about how publish in Aspire actually works in pretty deep details. And in my case, I'm going to do it in the context of wanting to do CI/CD. So if you watch most of our Aspire talks, they're probably in Visual Studio, and somebody right-clicks and publishes their Aspire application up to Azure, or they go to the command line and do an azd init, azd up, and it goes to Azure. I do want to call out that what I'm going to show a little bit also, even though I'm going to show it as part of Azure because I work in Azure. The product was designed not to be an Azure product. And so Aspire, I'll show you how it actually generates a manifest file, and that manifest file can be used by any cloud provider out there. The folks at AWS already have a tool chain that works with that manifest file, and so you can publish an Aspire application easily up to AWS. And I know the other cloud providers are working on it as well. So sometimes I read the comments on the socials, and it's like, Aspire is just an Azure product, and it is not an Azure product at all. It's a .NET product that actually has nothing to do with Azure at all. The .NET team literally produces a manifest file, and then my team over in Azure, we have a tool called Azure Developer CLI that actually knows how to take that manifest file and convert it into Azure resources. So I just want to be very clear. Even though I'm going to show Azure, this is not an Azure feature. So if you just look, there is this tutorial for deploying .NET Aspire project using the Azure Developer CLI. It's supposed to say using CI/CD. I'm like, that's no. Okay, so let's just do this. Let's jump in. And we have a bunch of cool stuff we can show today, but I'm going to start with this and show the CI/CD. So let's just go and we'll do NDC test. So I'm in here. I'll just do a .NET new Aspire use Redis cache. I want to have a more complicated sample. Does anybody here use a Mac?
Ooh.
Oh.
Does anyone here not know what Aspire is? Okay.
Good. Has anybody here tried to build an Aspire 9 application on their Macs?
Oh.
Not many. That's good. So first point of contention, since I have the product manager for Aspire staying next to me, is I was sitting here in the trying to build an Aspire 9 application for this event, and every time I created a new Aspire application, it was based on 8. And my machine has both .NET 9 and .NET 8 on it. And something that you need to know, so if those of you in the room, if you're on a Mac and you install Aspire, you do not get, you install .NET, you do not get the Aspire templates by default. You have to run .NET new install Aspire project templates 9.0.0. And so that's why just installing 9 and running it did not actually let me build an Aspire 9 application. But that's not the point of the talk. I just want to call that out in case anybody runs into the same problem. Look at the Aspire docs, and it will tell you to go run this to do that. In the future, we're going to make the SDK actually tell you, hey, we didn't find the Aspire templates. Here's how you can run them. So I'm going to run this, and nothing exciting here. It's just going to go create an Aspire application. The starter app, you've probably all seen a million times. You know, if I wanted to, I could jump into the app host folder and run it. I'm not, because it's boring. You've already seen it before. So I want to talk about CI/CD. And you know, most of our demos, I said before, we show you an AZD up, and your app is in Azure. But that's not really what you want. If you've got a team of people, me, Maddy, and Paul, I want to be able to have an application, and as we all make changes and commit them, I want the app running in Azure to change in my staging folder. So I'm going to do the typical AZD init. And what's going to happen, I'll show you as this thing starts doing stuff, what's going on. It's going to go and look for the Aspire application, and it's going to find it. And behind the scenes, it's going to run a command, and that command is going to generate a manifest file. And that's, as I said before, is how we create Azure resources. And I'll show you the manifest file in just a second. So we'll just do this, NDC test. And so I'm good. Now, most of the time, if you've been watching our demos, we would go right to AZD up, which would publish this to the cloud. But I'm going to do AZD pipeline config. And this is really cool tech. It's going to ask me, do I want to use Azure DevOps or GitHub? In my case, I'm going to use a GitHub action, so I'm going to say I want to use GitHub. It's going to reanalyze my app. And it said this file doesn't exist. Do I want to add it? I'm going to say yes. Now it's going to go and try to say, I need to find your Azure subscription. This is my personal subscription. And we'll choose a location. We'll do it in the UK West since we're kind of over here. And now it's going to say, I want to create a GitHub pipeline. And notice that I just created that in a folder. So I don't even have a Git repository yet. So the first thing it's going to ask me is, do I want to have a Git repository in my current directory? And I say, yes, I do. I'm going to use GitHub Action, so I actually need to have a repository. I'll create a private one right now. And we'll just call that NDC test the same way. And now it's going to start creating some stuff. It's going to create some stuff in the cloud, so my GitHub action actually can talk to Azure. It's going to go create some environment variables next, and it's going to shove all of this stuff into GitHub. So it's going to create a NDC test project inside of my GitHub repo. It's going to go make this service principal that actually connects my GitHub repo to Azure. So when that action runs, it can actually do stuff in Azure on my behalf. And you can see it put a subscription ID in there. It put a whole bunch of Azure stuff in there, that, including my location. These are all environment variables that are going to be got shoved into my action. And so everything's ready to go and run. Would you like me to push my local changes for this pipeline? And I'm going to say yes. And this would be a boring talk if this worked. This is not going to work. And I'll show you why. So let's go to GitHub. And if I look here and refresh my repositories, you're going to see NDC test. And I can go over to actions. And I can watch this thing run. And so if you've never seen this before, what's going to happen is it creates a virtual machine in the cloud. We go then and try to install .NET and Aspire and a bunch of stuff. And you're going to notice that this died. This did not work. And if I look at this, it's saying, looks like it's telling me that it couldn't find the .NET 9 SDK. And that's true. It could not find that SDK. So what happens is when I do that AZD pipeline config, it creates a workload JSON file or YAML file that's in my repo. And here is the file. And this is actually this is how we actually do CI/CD with AZD. So if you look here, there's a bunch of steps here where, zoom in a little bit here, you can see it's going to check my code out. It's going to install AZD. That's the command line tool that I was running and looking on my machine. It needs that in the cloud. It then goes and says .NET workload install Aspire. It wants to install Aspire. But the question I would ask is, what version of .NET is in this image? And it's kind of embarrassing. There's a pre-release version of 8 in the image that we supply here. And so this tool should actually have put in the code in the workflow file that would actually install the right version of .NET. And so what I did is I Googled around, and I found that there is in Actions under GitHub, there's an official setup.net command that you can run. And you can see here, I basically need to just paste this into my code, action/setup.net for with, and I give it the version, and then I'm good. So this will install .NET, the right version of .NET. So in my case, I don't have .NET 9 installed in here. And you just don't put things like 9.0 in there. That will not work either. The best way to think about this is, if I go to the download site for .NET, and I come over here and I say, show me all the .NET 9s, you can see the actual SDK is 9.0.102. I could put 9.0.star, and that would just pull whatever the latest version is. But I actually happen to stick this code right over here. Let's go grab this. And what I can do is go back to my action. And there is a nice edit button over here. And I can come over here. Let's go find the right place to stick this. And I'll do it right after the checkout. That seems like a fine place to stick this in. This is really cool once you get it working. And so, you know, I absolutely hate YAML files. Whoever created these things should die. Notice I have squiggles. It's because I need to put tabs here. And I need to know this tab needs to go under that tab. And this tab needs to go under that. So there we're good. We're all good. So all you have to do if you want to use this is, if you're using 8 or 9, you need to go and stick the right version of .NET into the action file. When I get back to Redmond, I hope we can actually have AZD, when it creates that pipeline config, look at your actual project and put the right version of .NET into that file. So let's go and commit that. And now what I can do is I can go back to Actions. And anytime, the way Actions works is my actions are currently set up, so anytime I make a commit to the repo, stuff's going to start happening. Same, which means if I'm in VS Code, I make some changes to my code. Now you can see there was a 9 that just showed up in here. Now we're making progress. It's all working as I would want now. Now it's actually going and provisioning my Azure stuff for me right now. That's going to take a bit of time. And while that's working, let's go back, and I want to show you some cool stuff here. So I'm in the folder here with NDC test, and I'm going to run a command. And once again, I'm not going to type this in front of you folks, so I just wrote this for myself up here. And what I'm basically doing is I'm going to run a .NET run. I give the project to my app host, and I tell it -- publisher, make me the manifest. So I'm asking it to publish the manifest for me and put it in this folder right here, or right in the folder I'm in right now. So this is going to run .NET, and it's going to go do what AZD is doing under the cover. And I'm doing this just because I want you to see what this actually does. Okay, so I now have if I look in here, I should have an aspire-manifest, so I can do code aspire-manifest.json. And now you can see this is kind of what happens is we analyze the project. You can see I've got my API service. That's my back end. You can see the environment variables we want to stick in there. We want to stick the ports in there. It's going to do HTTP. We show the transports. Here's my web front end. You know, notice it has a connection string to the cache. It's got connection strings, technically, or bindings to the back end. This is where we inject all the magic to make all the service discovery work in Aspire. But notice this doesn't talk about any cloud. This is not Azure. This is nothing at all. This is the same stuff that the folks at AWS have used to make this work with AWS. So that I just want to show you what we generate. It's generic, has nothing to do with Azure. And let's go back and look and see how we're doing over here. It is currently still making all my stuff in the cloud. We'll go back here, and I will do AZD infra synth. If you run this at home, the first time you run it, it might tell you it's a beta feature. It's not turned on by default, and it'll give you a command to turn it on. And so what this does is this takes that manifest file you just saw and converts it into Azure resources. And so many of our customers don't want us to just magically create all the stuff for you. You might want to actually manually create it off the bicep files, and this enables that scenario. So now if I go up here and look at my folder, I've got an infra folder, and inside of it I'm going to have a bicep file. This is where we converted all this stuff to Azure stuff. Here's the real one right here that has all the main stuff. There's my role assignments, my log analytics, my container app environment, my Aspire dashboard. You can see all the bits in here. And so you can manually generate these things and run them, run the bicep manually if you want to. But technically behind the scenes, this is what's going on to make all this magic work. So let's go back over here and see how we're doing. Still taking a little bit of time. The container app environment takes a bit to create. Once it does this, it'll go really, really fast. maybe what I'll do is I'll do another quick demo real quick.
I can hop in if you need to, but
Why don't you hop in and we'll swap back. So we're going to swap to
All right.
Maddy's machine real quick.
to my machine. Let's talk about health checks. Yeah? So .NET has this thing called health checks. That's built in to the platform,
Actually,
right? Oh, did it just deploy?
It's almost. Let me poke on you on the health
Oh.
checks. Has anybody used health checks?
Oh, good.
This is really good.
Good engineers.
Health checks with Aspire or just health checks in general? Health checks with Aspire.
Okay.
Way less hands.
That's fine.
So you probably are aware if you're raising your hands for health checks. In many cases, whether you're using Azure Container Apps or using AKS, all these things have orchestrators
Right.
that can look at your app. And the orchestrators have the ability to go and probe the app to make sure it's running okay, and if so, they can restart it or whatnot. I just want to give my
Yeah.
Azure side of this.
I like
which
it.
is
I like it.
Our orchestrators actually know how to do this kind of thing. We've actually had health checks in .NET since .NET Core 3, but they never were on by default.
Right.
And so I'm excited that with Aspire, they're in by default. And so
Awesome.
show us health checks.
Yeah. So if you heard me talk about Aspire before, I will tell you like 100 times. Things are on by default. We turn things on for you. That makes sense. You can always turn them off. You can always customize them. And because we just do it in code, right? It's nothing crazy. So this is just a basic Aspire project with a spoiler.
I apologize. I'm going to stop you. It's actually running now. Swap back to my machine just for 1 second. Now you can see that the deploy ran. You can see I've got my API. I've got a dashboard here. Actually, it failed to do the cache, it says. ACR, let's see what happens.
This is what
there.
happens when you interrupt me.
It is.
It's fine.
Okay, well, I guess I'll try again. So back to you, Maddy.
Who likes context switching? I like context. Okay. Yeah, so the way that Aspire works is that when you add these projects, when you add Aspire, enlist in Aspire orchestration is the official wording we use in VS and VS Code, which is way too many words. We also add something called the service defaults project. And so that is this. And it's doing basic things. Open telemetry things, resilience stuff, turn it on poly. But if you scroll to the very bottom of this file, right, and this is just file new Aspire project that I just gave a special name and I added a few lines of things to. What you get in there by default is a default health check. And we expose 2 endpoints by default. And so in this case, we are adding a health check on itself. It's making sure that it's giving healthy. And it's also adding this tag live, which is saying down here, when I map all my endpoints, health means everything in the entire health check stack, you guys know this, will have to pass. Alive, I'm going to make sure that the tag contains live, right? That's it. So by default, when I run my Aspire app, they're both going to show as healthy at the same time. But you can extend this. And in this case, I'm going to add one that's just an uptime health check, right? So let's say that I don't want to call my entire app healthy until it's been up for, I think I put 15 seconds. It's definitely not defined in the bottom of this file. I definitely used object-oriented programming, so it's totally fine. And in this case, you can see I'm just doing, if uptime is greater than 15 seconds, return healthy. And if not, return unhealthy. But I'm not tagging this one as live, right? I'm going to run this. There's a bug in Aspire right now that it eats up your ports. And so occasionally I have to go in and kill a bunch of processes. Sometimes it just works fine. Such as this time, it just worked fine. Wow, I shouldn't have even said anything. So if I go into the Aspire dashboard, oh my God, this is so zoomed out. I have my 2 things, my web front end and my API to service. If I hit the endpoint, cool. If I hit health, it's going to show me unhealthy because it hasn't been 15 seconds. If I hit, nope, alive, it will be healthy because it doesn't, that's how health checks work. Go back to health. Just keep refreshing this, I guess, until it says it's healthy. There you go. That was 15 seconds. So that's like literally the exact same way you would write a health check for any other .NET app project. That's just in this service defaults project. And so if I go into my web front end here, I can also add health checks specifically for my services. And so service defaults is referenced in all of the projects that use Aspire, just up the top here, builder.add service defaults. And that's what pulls in that extensions file and set of extensions. But I can also, at any point, just go and map a new health check to just this app, right? And in this case, I want to make sure that GitHub is alive, right? And so this is a super basic health check also defined in this file, which is just checking to see if this thing responds at 200, right? And so in my, it should actually already be up. I should be able to now just also do, in my front end, hopefully this is the front end, service, healthy, just like that. It's extendable. Now, what you will notice in the extensions project is we only turn these things on in development. Because you should not expose endpoints for funsies that have no protection on them, right? And if you deploy this to something like Azure Container Apps using AZD, it's all going to be in a VNet except for what you expose publicly. But even if you do expose a health endpoint publicly, people are going to try and DDoS it or whatever it is, right? These are all bad ideas. So what we have is the regular old health checks, set a timeout, set an expiration, right? I'll copy these in so that you can get the syntax highlighting, but it's you get the point here. But let me do this. In the add default health checks method, you can just add a couple. Why does VS Code never indent when I want it to? Go away. A couple things, including just a timeout, right? The regular policy mechanism that is with ASP.NET Core health checks, because this is just those. And in this case, the output cache, which is saying, this is how you prevent getting spammed a bajillion times. So it's a 10-second cache here. And then down at the bottom, if you want to pull these out of development, right, you can do the exact same thing, except you put them in just in a map of all your health check URLs. Nope, this file folder. Here. Get out the if development.
Do you have an Azure Container App that actually calls the health checks?
I mean, I'm sure if I deployed it, it would do that. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but yeah, so now I have all my health checks. They're just with protections, right? And so yeah, you can go ahead and go into Azure Container. I'll deploy this while you show yours. Did you get it to work?
Mine works now, yeah.
All right, then I'll deploy this.
Flip mine over, flip mine on, and back to my machine, please.
Yep.
So you see, all I did is ran the workflow again. There was an error in the workflow. Azure doesn't work all the time, sorry. And so you can see it all deployed, ran all this. This is actually doing a cleanup and removing all the stuff in the VM. But now the app is running in, it's the boring weather app. But the difference now is, because I did that action, whenever I make any commits in my source code, that action will kick off and republish the application. And so we have a proper developer-focused actions. Works great with GitHub Actions, works great with ASDO pipelines. And you saw it took me just a couple minutes to do that. Main thing being, you're going to have to go edit the workflow file and go put the right code in to install the right version of .NET until we fix the tool. So with that, I will go back to you.
I have not deployed it yet. Oh, OK. Let's see what I do have deployed. Let's go to...
I was just giving you a hard time. You don't have to have it deployed.
Oh, all right. I mean, I can run it in the background. Yeah, let's go back to my machine for a sec, and we will talk about something completely different, which is custom commands. And I just want to show you an example of how these work. It's another one of those things that we don't really show a lot, but is very cool. And the Aspire samples repo has a bunch of stuff for this. So if you go into the Aspire shop sample, which used to be called eShop Lite, by the way, for any of you who saw that before, there is a couple things in here: database, Redis cache, a bunch of projects for all of these things. And then we have this thing called HTTPS command. Let me zoom in on that. Oh, that's too far, too zoom. And all you're giving that is an endpoint to hit, the name of it, and the icon. And in the catalog database manager here, we're just creating an endpoint called resetDB. And so this is using a bunch of dependency injection to get the context and the initializer and all of that. And all that this endpoint is doing is making sure that the database gets deleted and making sure the database gets reinitialized.
So I want to reset the database for my app.
Yep. So you go and you build a bunch of stuff, and then you add things to your database and blah, 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 and then you're like, okay, let me see what happens if this empties out. You could do the same thing with running like a database migration. We have that example somewhere. So let me Aspire Shop app host, Aspire Shop app host CS proj.
So I can do this from the dashboard now?
So give it a second. Hopefully it finds all my ports. Yeah, what you're doing in the app host when you do this with HTTPS command is you're telling the dashboard to extend that resource with that specific command. And so now, when I have to wait for all these things to spin up, of course, but if I go to my catalog DB manager, I have this little custom command right there.
That is super cool.
It's super nifty. And because it's an endpoint, right, I could also just take this URL and hit reset database whenever I want, right? So that's really good if you own the project code. If you don't have the code and you want to do this on a resource, let me find the other sample I want to show. Aspire. I'm in like 18 repos in this, so I just did not have them all open. It was not going to be worth it.
So I can basically run any command or any of my actual containers if I want to with this thing. I just basically can annotate my app host and have code to run when I want it to run.
Where is the one I want? We're just going to Google it because I know exactly.
I would never do it this way, but imagine a scenario where you actually have a command on your application where you say, hey, email all the customers, the monthly announcement or whatever. You could actually do stuff like that. You could do workflows.
Yep. There is a sample for this, but it's not in the samples thing for whatever reason. This is when you extend the actual builder class itself, right? So in this case, you are using basic old Stack Exchange Redis, which is what the Aspire hosting package pulls in. Where is this sample? I just filed a bug on this last night because I was like, why isn't the sample linked here? I wonder if I can find it. Hold on. Let's see if David Pine has fixed my issues yet. No, it's the other one. Okay. In here, we have, let me scroll all the way back up. Let me make this full screen because I can't even read it. All the way. Okay. The Stack Exchange Redis component, right? This is just a builder extension. So iResource Builder is how we define resources in Aspire. And you can extend this any way you want. It doesn't have to be a Redis resource. It doesn't have to be whatever. Like any Aspire integration that exists is built on this resource builder interface. And so you can just do this stuff to it. And what we're doing in this one is builder.with command. And so we have the iResource Builder with command extension, which gives you things like name, display name, the actual execution command, and then what happens when it's updated. And in this case, we are running this command we created down here, where we connection string, blah, 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 all exciting. We actually get this database from the Redis cache, because Redis is really just a database that empties itself out every couple seconds or whatever it is. You're doing the regular connection string way that you would talk to Redis any other way if you were using just plain old extensions or whatever it is. And then you're just flushing it, and that's it. And so this, we're also doing some cool logging things down here. So we're telling you that the health is or isn't enabled. I believe we have this in eShop. Now that I think about it.
There's a Redis cache in eShop. It'd be really cool if you could just empty the cache whenever you want to go.
I'm pretty sure it's in there.
Cache.
Let me.
To make sure your application worked correctly when the cache was not healthy.
Yep. .NET run. If you can tell, I am a command line person. I prefer not to F5 on the Mac. And so it's all great and all, except for the fact that I have to write -- project every time, and it is a whole pain. Nope, not solution, CS proj.
Just imagine if you had a feature for that.
You mean like a command line autocomplete?
Just
Because what? Yeah, yeah. Warp. Okay.
Aspire
Sidebar while this is
run.
building. Aspire run. Whole other story. Warp is so slow on my machine, and I don't know why. So if anyone knows how to make Warp faster, I really want to use it. It's very cool.
Warp is fast on my machine.
It sucks on mine. And this is an M3. Anyways. Okay, I just ran this. Redis does not have the clear cache in here. That's okay. But you can also see that it is grabbing the health state as well. So that's another thing I didn't show with health checks that I should actually show real quick. All of these integrations have built-in, any Aspire integration has a built-in health check. So we just saw it on the Redis there, but I'll show you how you would just, enable it just by this. That's it. And so what we do is we expose in that resource builder, which you saw in the docs, the ability for Aspire's dashboard to read the health check state. And then you get this nice little thing down here that says healthy with a little green heart, which is very cute. That's what this is, right? So saying if it's healthy, right? Resource command state enabled to turn on the clear cache resource. I need to find the demo of this. I know I have it.
Let's give Paul a chance to show functions, and then if you want to come back and do
Yeah, multi-repo is a whole other story.
So we have multi-repo, which is really cool.
What time is
I'm going to let Paul,
Oh, yeah.
I want to make sure we don't run out of time. Switch back to me for a second. I just want to show Warp. If you didn't see Hanselman and I on Wednesday, I'm kind of like her. I'm a command line junkie. But imagine the amount of goop you have to type if I just want to see all the JSON files in a folder is more than I like to memorize. And I can just say, show me. I'm in the folder of the app that we were just playing with. Show me all the .json files. This is a AI command line tool. And so find .-type f -name star.json. I don't have to know how to do that. I just ask the AI. It wrote the command for me. There's all my JSON files. So super cool.
Wow.
Okay, you ready, Paul?
Yeah. All right, let's unplug and replug.
So Paul's going to show some really cool stuff. Not only is he's going to take an Aspire app, run it inside of container apps using Azure Functions, and he's going to throw load on it. It's going to scale up and then scale back down in real time. So this is showing real world stuff. And I'm super excited. Normally we show a demo. We just shipped a feature at Ignite called Flex Consumption Functions. Cool. It's a version of, which one do you want to steal?
Oh, steal mine. Steal mine. You can steal mine.
Okay.
You can stand on the cute little boxes.
And it's a version of Azure Functions that can scale from 0 to 100 in just seconds, or even 0 to 1,000. But in our case, also with .NET 9 that shipped in November, we added Azure Function support.
They'll switch it.
We just tell them.
Okay. Yeah.
Switch to the other machine.
The new machine, please.
We added Azure Function support to Aspire. And so Paul works in the function team at Microsoft, and he's going to show how we can run the Azure Function runtime in Aspire, and we can still scale it, not the same way we can with Flex, but it still scaled really well when we were playing with it.
Yeah, it did.
The last couple of days.
All right. So just a couple of things about my rig. I saw a lot of hands go up about Macs. That was kind of exciting. I'm gonna do a fun mix today. I have Azure DevBoxes. Have folks heard of that? So it lets you easily set up kind of Windows full desktop machines with your developer rig, your enlistment, your SSH keys, all the goodies. And I'm actually going to use that to get a little Visual Studio on my Mac while we do this today. So we'll get the kind of the best of everything. So here I'm basically remote desktoped into my PC. I'll make it a little bigger for you. And I have some code for you that you can take home. I'm going to show it to you first, just in case you want that. So here's a little QR code and an easy ACA link. Everything I show you here, don't worry, you just go grab it here. I'm going to drop it in the Room 1 chat afterwards too. Okay, so now we got that. Let's go to Visual Studio. Let's create a new function the way we always do. So we'll create a new project, and we'll create an Azure function. We'll call this one NDC Live. Sorry, the fonts are a little tricky. All right, and I'm going to do Aspire 9 and .NET 9. Aspire 9 is where the new function features show up. And very important thing, in the tooling, we want to, like Maddy said before, we want to enlist in .NET Aspire, and that'll register this function and every successive function or microservice or API, it'll keep kind of adding what you write to that distributed application in Aspire. So we'll hit create. And really that's just a tooling gesture. So if I go to, I see that I have my original function. And how am I going to be able to do this? Maybe like that. Okay, so it's just an absolutely simplistic HTTP function. This is the same as always, but now I have this app host project. And the key in the app host project is that it's using this builder that will add Azure Functions project as a new extension method. So that comes in with an Aspire 9. And I'm excited because we're going to be adding more and more features together. So you could do like with Docker, hopefully soon, but at least you could do things like with HTTP or HTTPS endpoint, and you can start using that middleware to easily expose the function application to the rest of the world as you deploy. Well, let's just start with the defaults. And I like to customize this a little bit. So let's call the function HTTP, just so it's a little bit easier to see. And I'm going to rename it also to HTTP, and Visual Studio is very nice and symbolically renames everything. And I could just hit F5. What F5 will do is going to start the app host project, and the app host project now has a middleware that knows how to do a func start, which basically starts the function's runtime and wires it all up to Aspire. So I can see now, not only do I have the function, but I have the Aspire dashboard. And this is really cool. So I'm seeing my function show up, my function storage. I see the endpoint. If I go to the logs, boy, I wish this was a little bigger. It's like at the end of, I guess that works. There we go. So we can see that even the function's runtime output is showing up here. So I can see the test URL for the function. And I could.
Azure Functions running inside of Aspire.
Yep, Azure Functions the Azure Functions runtime fully running Aspire just by using that middleware to add the function project. So far so good. And I'm getting my logs. Let's kind of come back here. I get structured logs, which is super cool. So just by having Aspire, my observability is already way better. As a lot of you know, Functions uses Azure storage for state management. And also, Aspire, it's really cool. It sets up the Azurite emulator to be my storage emulator for Functions. Just all that tedious kind of wire up, Aspire is taking care of for me. Oh, wow, you can see it's live updating. And Functions now supports OpenTelemetry. So Functions OpenTelemetry output works super well with Aspire, and we're seeing it all come together. So that's kind of the local inner loop. Things are looking really good. Let's come back to Visual Studio. And we'll come out of this. Let's have a little bit of fun. Let's add an HTTP file. We'll call this test.htp. We'll use a little copilot. We'll say, build me a test.htp file that tests a post on this HTTP function. Okay, that's close enough. And this method was so simple, we didn't really have a payload of data to pass. And the one thing, did anybody remember what port this was running on? I probably need to check that. Are you going to pull Hunter and zoom in here?
No.
Okay.
No, don't worry.
That's so nice of you. All right, 7196. All right, and if all goes well, we can use this REST client. 404 not found. Oh, we need to have the route looking right. Let's try that again. There we go, 200. So now, very end-to-end, I have the simplest hello world, but I'm doing gets, I'm doing post, and that's kind of the self-check that I want to do before I get into the load test. I want to make sure that this thing is curl and HTTP post callable. As we do that, let's go ahead and let's deploy this thing. And that's really easy with Aspire, thanks to Aspire's integration with Azure Dev CLI, or AZD. So if I go here and go to the properties, let's grab the folder. Let's go into the command line, make that a bit bigger. All right, so now we're in the app host folder. Let's pop up a level. What I like to do is I like to do my commands at the solution level, one level higher, so that I can get all my dependencies. And here I'm going to say azd init. And it's a little hard with the blue on black, but it's saying use the code in the current directory. Yep, that's right. And it's scanning, and it should find the Aspire project, which is that app host project. There we go. And we'll call this NDC live environment. And now we can do, actually, let's just take a peek at what that did. So all that really did is it created an Azure YAML file, and it identified, hey, this function app is a .NET app, here's the project code, and we want to deploy it as a container. And it's really cool because both Aspire and .NET and AZD, they actually don't need Docker files to start with, so they could do code to cloud, just simply having this one manifest file, and off it goes. But we're going to go more advanced than that in a second. Maddie, what's up? Looks like you need something.
No, I'm just implementing
sure I'm
Redis
okay.
clear command
Okay.
because I don't want to not show it.
You're just doing some coding.
Just coding.
Okay.
If you can't tell, this was Scott, Paul, and I being like, what are all the things people ask about? I'll show this one. I'll show this one. All right, let's see what happens.
All right.
It's pretty fun. It's real.
All right, so let's come back here, and now that this is ready to go, and we saw what it does, let's just do an AZD up. And we'll pick a subscription, we'll pick a region, let's put it in the UK. Come on now. There we go, so here's my subscription. Do folks here use the Azure Dev CLI? Kind of for getting started, I'm assuming? Easy getting started? All right, perfect. Cool, and we're off to the races. And what this will do, it'll use some infrastructure as code, and it'll set up all the resources, and it'll deploy it. Now, this takes about 2, maybe 3 minutes. You don't want to see me do that, so let's pop over and let's look at, we'll do the chef trick, and we'll pull one out of the oven. So here I have the exact same setup where I've deployed an HTTP function. Now notice the HTTP function's running on a container app. And this is cool because functions can actually run in all kinds of hosts, not only in, say, flex consumption or premium functions, but also in container apps, app service, all kinds of things. So we're going to use that capability, and we're exposing it as a container app. Now, one very important thing to think about is when you initially deploy a container app, it's going to kind of network fence it by default. It will network isolate inbound traffic. That's a good practice for security, but if I'm going to do a load test from a public load test agent, I'm going to need to open this up from anywhere. So I went to ingress, I said accepting traffic from anywhere, and notice these internal URLs. So let's hit save. And now what's going to happen is we're going to basically expose an ingress and allow that external endpoint.
You can do that with code as well in your app host.
You can do it in the app host, that's right.
External HTTP will do that in your app host for you.
I guess it's a decision. Do you want, as a developer, to assert whether it's public, or do you want a post-step with configuration? I lean towards config. Tell us after what you prefer.
DevOps.
Yeah, a little bit of DevOps. Something like security, you got to coordinate, I think. All right, so we did that, and then one more thing I want to do. Let's look at the scale. We don't want to wuss out here. So normally you have a scale limit of 10 replicas, or basically 10 instances of an application or a function. Let's set it up to at least 100. And then it's got a cooldown default of 300, or about 5 minutes. Let's just go for 30 seconds. That way, we scale out really rapidly, and as the traffic is going down, we're going to scale in. And notice one of the things that AZD and Aspire did is it set up this autoscaler for us. It set up that autoscaler rule, and it uses Kata under the covers, right?
Ooh.
So uses some open source to kind of handle that.
Kata is the open source project we use for scaling in container apps, and you can also run it in AKS as well.
Very cool. All right.
Container apps hides Kata from you, but it's actually there, and you can just write simple rules inside of the actual portal or command line.
Now what we're going to do, we're going to bounce, sorry for the bouncing around on Windows. We'll make this a little bigger for you. All right, so what I first want to do is just make sure that I could reach the function, because a load test on the function, we don't want to get a bunch of 400 errors or something like that. So let's paste in this URL we just got back from the container apps. I think that was a little too aggressive. All right, let's try it. Not found. All right, so if you're getting a not found, we just check a couple things. Let's make sure we're using the right URL. Let's make sure that the function's runtime is loaded. Let's make sure it has the endpoint we expected. There we go. That is actually what we want. Let's go back into the curl. It could do both. It should be able to do both. That's what we tested. Good catch. Come on. There we go, 200, okay. Thanks for everybody's help. We got that. All right, then the very last step, let's do a load test. Now, there's a lot of ways you could do this. Actually, in Azure, we have a built-in load test tool called Azure Load Test, which is really handy and really nice. That has a little bit of a warm-up period. That's not friendly for demos. So we're going to do instead, we're going to use this open source tool called Plow. And Plow is basically, it's like curl on super steroids. Gosh, with the Mac mouse and two-finger stretch, it is just tricky.
Yeah, he also has his scroll, like, when you scroll down, the page scrolls down, which I think is criminal. If you scroll down, the page should scroll up.
He's got it backwards. I don't know why he has his Mac.
I was trying to use it, and I couldn't.
He uses his Mac at all. It's backwards.
Terrible.
Tell me how you really feel. Okay. All right, no problem. To each their own. So, all right, we'll get another tab open here. We're in Plow. So I've got the Plow utility. Let's make this a little bigger. And let's start this load test. And this thing's cranking. It's actually going to make 500 connections. And you can see in each of them we're getting 200s, so that's a good sign. And as that's happening, I'm going to show you a pretty cool trick or two. So we're going to go to the container app, and we're going to go to monitoring and metrics. So a few key metrics I like to look at for load test. I mean, the most obvious ones are we're going to look as a function of requests. That's kind of our load. And it's going to take a few seconds for this to, I think, with latency, show the metrics. There we go. We're already seeing a ramp up. And then what I want to do is add more metrics. So let's look at the replicas. And replicas are basically the number of instances that are running. There we go. And we're probably going to take off into hyperspace in a few moments with this load test. There we go. See the replica counts already going up?
It's up to 11.
It's not refreshing fast enough. If I get lucky, one of these refreshes will show crazy. There we go. Well, it's at the beginning of the ramp. Oh. If we look back at the last
Refreshing.
24 hours. Yeah, so you can see other load tests I've done where we've just gone sane. So right there, we've got 100 replicas serving 878,000 requests, right? So we're doing major RPS, and we're getting that scale. And all that's really showing is this full thing works together. So we had a really easy experience with Aspire, but it's not a toy. We deployed it onto serverless container apps. We automatically got auto-scale rules down. It's incredibly fast. You can get up to 1,000 instances in under a minute. You can get 100 instances in seconds. And then with the cooldown, it's also going to scale back in when you're not putting that kind of load on it. So you're really just paying for what you're using. And this is the awesome kind of property of serverless compute.
Yeah.
We're not paying that dedicated compute cost. And then I'll leave just kind of a few ideas for us that I would want to do as next steps. And I think this is something we're going to work on in the tooling. I would actually want to use a container for this. So I used, right before this meeting, we'll put it in Zen mode, I used Copilot to help generate the right Docker file. So we have a base image for Azure Functions, and it's supported by the Functions team. And all I'm really doing is starting from that image, I'm doing a build of the app host project, taking all the outputs, and I'm shoving it in the container. And then also, just to be a little bit fancy, I'm just showing that with a container, I can install my own custom software. So one of the most common things I see people do is actually install FFmpeg. It's just like a really common I've seen some head nods, use case with functions that works super well. So as you need to customize the operating system and the dependencies on the disk, I mean, this is container apps, so you have full control. So you can make that Docker file. And then also, I showed you, we kind of automatically created those resources in Azure, but you can also take control of that too. So I learned about a great thing the team did. Here I can say, I think it's AZD infrasynth. And this is an alpha feature. But what this will do is it will, oh yeah, you show this. Yeah, so it's creating all the stuff. And then, you know how I showed you that I want the auto scale rules to be set between a window of 1 and 100. Now I have the infrastructure as code where I can do that. And I also want the ingress to be public, so I would just go do that. And now it's, to me, I like that because it's all infrastructure as code. I make a commit, and that's how I do a DevOps change. And that's it.
Sweet.
That's functions kind of advanced using Aspire.
Fancy. And yeah, so
Cool.
it's, I think you said this, it's in preview, just because it doesn't,
It's in preview.
it's getting there. Almost done.
We'll let you know when it's ready.
Yep. All right, let's switch back to the other HDMI for hopefully the last time, please. I have 5 minutes to show multi-repo, so we're gonna
All right.
fly through this. Okay, how many of you have all of your code for all of your stuff in one giant repo? You could say a mono repo. Okay, one of you. 2 of you, wow, okay. How many of you have like a repo for every service or team or something? And yeah, okay. So what we hear a lot with Aspire is, I have this app host, what do I do if everything's in all different repos? And so someone asked this like a year ago, and Damien just responded and said, here are the things I think will emerge. And all of these things are emerging. I'm going to show you 2 of the 3. The most powerful one is to just, in an app host, make a central app host that everybody clones and git submodule everything. And then if you only want to work on one part of it at a time, you just clone that repo. If you want to work on everything, have an app host with a bunch of git submodules, call it a day, right? But I'm not going to show that because that's boring. I'm going to show the other 2 things that you can do. So what I thought the kind of default pattern would be that, oh, let me open the thing again. Would be that people would, publish to a staging environment, right? So I don't know how many of you have a staging environment, if that's a thing that people do, but I am going to open code here. Code. Sweet. And I just made like the most basic demo here. It's pretty much Aspire Starter, but it's split. into a back end and a front end. Go away, Visual Studio. Go away. Okay. And so the backend, I Aspirified both of them because it's easier to deploy when it's Aspirified. You don't have to. This works the same with just like a regular front end and or back end. So if your back end team is being stubborn and will not Aspirify, that's okay. They just have to publish it somewhere. And what I actually did was I just straight up deployed this backend using AZD. You can see I have the Azure YAML and the Azure folder and all this. I just deployed this straight to my container apps instance, which is up here somewhere. Actually, I'll get the URL when I run it. That's my Redis cache demo if we have time. And in my front end, I didn't do anything fancy except for add a URL. So I deployed it here. Let me copy paste this so that we can go to it. And let me run this. So .NET run project. Nope, not rub. Nope, project. Front-end .apphost, front-end.apphost.csproj. Sweet. And we're going to go look at this. And I just literally, I did this morning because I've been told that I cost a lot of money to our org because I deploy a bunch of things and I never tear them down. So I just did this morning. And I did AZD init, AZD up, the usual Aspire demo we show for deployment. And it just deployed the same backend that we give you in the regular app, right? And then I'm just hitting the endpoint here. So I'm not really doing anything too fancy. So if I click this, I go in here, it just loads. And it's hitting a separate URL. So I can still, in my front end, go and see what's going on here with the HTTP requests. But this is like the most basic version. In 2 minutes, I am going to show you what I did to build my own container of the backend and pull that down locally and run it. So this is in the world where you want to build something locally, you want to build something from source, whatever it is. I used GitHub Container Registry on my backend here. Nope, go away, this. And I just built this API service. I used .NET Publish. I don't know if everyone knows you can do this. I go to backend. You can just do .NET Publish and then some various commands. I closed out my terminal, so I can't grep it to show you exactly what I did. To publish this, do the Dockerfile BS for you, and stick it in a container registry. And so in my project file, I have a couple things. Container image name, which is just it's saying put it on GitHub Container Registry under mine, under this particular repo, right? So if you go on my GitHub now, GitHub, not .NET Aspire, just go to my GitHub. I have now a package that is just a container floating in space, the multi-repo demo -backend. And so what I did was I pulled this Docker image locally, and in my Docker desktop, oh my God, I have so many things running. That is very bad. I have a bunch of images, including, go, zoom, my own image, right? So if I was your team, it would be my team -backend or whatever. And then in Aspire, what you can do in my front end is, in the app host, in the programs, you can actually just add something as a container right here. And so this is builder, add container backend. I give it the name of my container in Docker. I'm choosing to keep it persistent. And then I'm giving it this thing called an HTTP endpoint. And I'm giving the endpoint a name. And then I'm assigning that the endpoint returns a different type of object than the actual endpoint, right? So I'm making sure I get the URL specifically, and I pass that as a reference into my front end. And so what I can then do in my front end is go here.
You're doing this to make service discovery work.
I'm making service discovery work.
So basically, using a random container, creating an endpoint in the container, sharing that with the rest of Aspire. Now my front end can see the back end.
Correct.
Any team just builds containers.
Right.
Reference them from your project.
Yeah, wherever your container registry is. And so,
What you did was showing, I have an Aspire application that just wants to talk to something.
right,
And so I just take the URL and shove that into the service discovery.
yes.
You can discover the functions too, like the one I just.
Yeah, and you can do the same thing with functions with whatever. So this is now building and also turning on and running the container I gave it, right? So this is the image. It was already running, so you didn't have to wait for it to run. But it's right here. Aspire creates this guy, backend -random hash. And that's built on my image that I gave it. And then if I go to the Aspire dashboard, oh, the logging is crazy high too. Oh, this is the wrong one. That was the Redis cache. We're not going to have time for it. Now I actually have a container resource type in my Aspire app host dashboard that I can go to the endpoint. I can see how things are actually injected into my front end here. I can see all the traces and things as things go between, and I could click around and show you all of this, but I think you all know how it works. So the most important thing for you to walk away from here with is .NET Aspire samples. This is the thing with all the samples. There are a lot, and we add them all the time. So yeah, this was, I don't know, we showed a lot of stuff. We just showed multi-repo, we showed some health checks, we showed a little bit of command, sort of, we showed functions, we showed various CI/CD, miscellaneous.
You said you had your Redis now set up.
Yeah, but we're way over, so I'll show it later. But I can show it to people at the booth.
2 minutes over.
Yeah. I will be at the Microsoft booth for the next couple hours until I officially fall asleep from jet lag, so feel free to come ask me any questions. I don't know where Scott and Paul will be. You guys will probably
Be around for a little bit.
yeah. But yeah, thank you so much. Hope you picked up at least a couple tips from here.